We are online. We are live.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello. I warmly welcome you to our 74th webinar by the Academy of Space Renaissance International. My name is Sabine Heinz, and I'm the person responsible for our webinar series. And on this 27th of January 2025, I'm really delighted that you have come to join us. Our today's special guest is Joe Carroll. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
And he will speak about oh God, I didn't put the title.
Multiplanetary and/or interplanetary.
Yes, exactly. And I also would like to welcome Adriano Autino. He is Vice President and co-founder of the SRI and former President of the SRI. Hello, Adriano.
Hello, Sabine. Hello, Joe. Welcome
Hello.
everybody here to this very interesting webinar that I think Joe will talk to us about different solution for living in space on the planet surface or in artificial infrastructures in orbit and the Lagrange points, according to the Gerard O'Neill design of the past century.
Well, the exact title is Multiplanetary or Interplanetary. I'm sorry, I didn't notice the title here in my script. Before I give you the floor, I would like to introduce you to our audience, Joe. Joe Carroll has worked in aerospace since 1981 and is now mostly retired. He developed the space tether systems used in SEDS, PMG, SEDS 2, TIPS, and TEPCE.
TEPCE.
His current focus is spinning space stations to evaluate human health and moon and Mars gravity. We are really curious to your lecture, and you may share your screen.
Okay. Let's see. Looks like I have to do the okay,
Yes.
and
Yes.
there. Okay.
You may start your show.
Yes.
You may start talking.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are. um, this is a topic that I think there are many people who have very strong ideas on multiplanetary versus anything else, or interplanetary versus anything else. And I'm sitting in the middle. I think we need to consider both because, as I'm going to argue, we really don't know where we're going to end up going. And I'll explain why. Let's see. Good. So, what do these terms mean? Multiplanetary can be present on more than one planet. It's actually, there's another meaning, which is a description of a star that has more than one planet around it. But in terms of this solar system, excuse me for a second, I had a long cold. In this solar system, it means living or being in more than one, on more than one planet. Interplanetary focuses on the space between planets. And you're likely to see multiplanetary if you're listening to Elon Musk or talking about cities on Mars or Occupy Mars. You're likely to hear interplanetary if you're talking or hearing about O'Neill colonies or Dyson spheres. So the rest of this lecture focuses on their implications. And one of the big things is there's an unexpected constraint. Actually, let me go forward. And we know, based on 60 years experience of people living in space for brief periods of over a year, that zero G or microgravity is not good for sustained human health. There are at least 6 different problems, and many of them became visible within days, but most of them did not become clearly a problem until people were spending 6 months or longer in space stations as opposed to capsule flights. I'm not going to go into all 6 because on the right-hand side at the bottom, there are 3 books. Packing for Mars is just a pure delight to read, and it's very well done. And it talks about the problems if we're going to go to Mars. Endurance talks about Scott Kelly's year on the space station. And then A City on Mars is by a couple that started out enthusiastic and got more and more skeptical over time when they looked into the gory details. And some of those gory details are how healthy are you going to be in stays much longer than a year? And will human babies grow up normally? Will they even be implanted and gestated normally? We don't know. So let me go back to why this is relevant to us. There are 20 bodies with substantial gravity, surface gravity in our solar system, and they're clustered. Jupiter's an outlier. It's too heavy and lots of other problems for colonizing it. But there are 4 other planets that have nearly Earth gravity. And then you look for something lower, and there are 2 planets near Mars gravity. And there's a difference of a factor of more than 2.5. It's less than 40% of the gravity of Earth. And then roughly another 40%, the gravity of Mars is not just our moon, but the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter and also one of Saturn's moons, Titan. And so if you want to, excuse me, if you're going to want to live in the solar system off Earth, you've got 3 gravity levels that determine which of the, 12 places you might go. And it's not clear, if you look at the, excuse me again, if you look at the 4 planets that have nearly Earth gravity, Venus has close to the same escape velocity. So it's no harder to come home than it is to go there. But the other 3, Saturn, Neptune, Saturn, and Uranus, have 2 to 3 times the orbit velocity, the escape velocity. So if you go there, it's a one-way trip. You're not going to be able to come home. You're not going to be able to send samples of anything. You're just there. When you have twice the orbit velocity, it's not like twice as hard. It's as hard again. You need a rocket under the rocket that would take you from Earth to orbit, as much larger than your capsule as the rocket, fueled rocket that can take you from Earth. So it's basically, you need a rocket about 40 or 50 times larger to escape those objects. So when you start looking at the other places you might live, Mars is an obvious one. The moon and the other moons are obvious. But we don't know if that's good enough. If you look at the chart on the right, our only real data is 0G, micro G, and 1G. And we have no data on sustained. I mean, you can spend a few minutes, or 12 guys spent 1 to 3 days on the moon, but the micro G health problems didn't mostly occur, didn't surface clearly until we were there months. So the question is, can we live on the moon and Mars in good health? And we simply don't know. We have no data, and we can't test that on Earth. Now, this could be a problem because if you ignore a health issue that's novel, it can sabotage a very large project. And here are 2 examples. The Brooklyn Bridge, workers had to be working underwater in several atmospheres of pressure. That had been done before, but only in shallower water where they could come back up and not have the bends. This is where the bends started to be experienced, and it killed people. It delayed the project. It greatly increased its cost. During the project, the cause was found, but it took another 30 years before it was actually understood and fixed, figured out the solution of gradual reduction in pressure in a nonlinear way. The other example is the Panama Canal, a huge project, okay? France was serious about it, and then they even had a good hospital, but they were worried about bugs other than mosquitoes, and so they put all the hospital beds on cups and filled them with water. Well, that's what mosquitoes love to breed in, okay? 3/4 of the people that got sick and went to the hospital left the hospital in coffins, okay? In building 40% of the canal, 22,000 people died, mostly from malaria or yellow fever. 20 years later, because of the good luck of the person in charge of health issues, was somebody who had been in the Spanish-American War in Cuba and understood how seriously you had to take mosquitoes. And so we took it much more seriously, but we still killed 5,600 people, mostly from malaria and yellow fever. There are 2 great books, both by David McCullough, The Great Bridge and The Path Between the Seas. And if you want to understand how seriously to take this problem, novel health issues, those books are great. They're good reads and they're very instructive. So the real question, the bottom line of the slide is, will ignoring health issues like the effects of low gravity delay human expansion beyond Earth? And let me go back again to this graph on the upper right here. One of the things to keep in mind is that Mars gravity is closer to 0G than 1. And even in 1G, you have to exercise to stay healthy. So Moon and Mars gravity, it's quite questionable that we will get as healthy as we would like to be to actually live there. So now we can send people to Mars or the Moon and have them stay for 6 months or a year, or we can do something much closer to home. Imagine a spinning space station that's dumbbell shaped, and it has an asymmetrical mass ratio of 7 to 3. And as it's spinning, one side sees Mars gravity and the other gets moon gravity. And you can live just as people are living in the space station right now for 6 months to a year. People can live and find this out in low Earth orbit. Now, if you start saying, well, it'd be better to really do it on the moon or Mars, but the cost to deliver crews and cargo to the moon or Mars are roughly 10 times more than getting to LEO. If you're going to do tests on both moon and Mars gravity, you need 2 bases and 2 supply trains. If you're doing stuff in LEO, it's 1 facility, and you can rendezvous, supply vehicles and crew vehicles can meet at the hub, the traditional solution for von Braun spinning donut station concepts. Another factor is that on-demand trips from Earth to LEO are hours. And the moon, it's only a few days, roughly 3. If you're going to do on-demand trips from Mars, depending on when you are in the synodic cycle, it can be as short as 6 months, or if you miss the window, you have to wait 2 years and then do it again, and that ends up being 30 months. So if people need some med and you run out, you really have to plan things in advance. And as a reinforcement, just consider Amazon. Its success is predicated on getting more things to more people faster and cheaper. Excuse me. If you're going to go to Mars, you're not going to go there in a hurry. You're not going to get there cheaply. So there are arguments for considering this in LEO. There are other reasons that you aren't direct comparisons with the moon and Mars. One is if you've got one spinning facility with the tube between the two that people can travel, you can have the same staff and equipment evaluate people at both gravity level. And if you find any differences or similarities, you're much more able to see it if you have the same people and equipment and going back and forth and testing between them, as opposed to having people on the moon and Mars with different staff and perhaps different equipment because of costs. A spinning tether can deploy a string with a payload on it and cut the line at the right time and throw biosamples back to Earth within 2 hours, okay? You can't do that from the moon. You can't do it from Mars. Ionizing radiation doses are far lower in LEO than elsewhere, and that means nearly anywhere in the solar system. And then any exposures to toxic materials, the abrasive stuff from the moon or the perchlorates in Mars, if you're going to be there for a year, you're going to want to go outside and you're going to track in stuff. And the question of, is this health problem completely related to gravity or completely related to the toxic material exposure or some combination? It would be better to test the health issues from gravity separately from the local toxic material issues. Now, there are 2 challenges that I know of with artificial gravity, distinct kinds of challenges. One is that artificial gravity is an orphan. It's not space exploration, it's not space science, and it's not microgravity science. Those are the pigeonholes in which funding occurs that NASA funds programs for, and this isn't related to those. So NASA seems to have awarded AG ever since Gemini 7, but they are currently interested in funding some tests in Blue Origin suborbital flights where they will spin and get a few minutes of partial gravity, artificial gravity at various levels. And they're at least talking about crew flights to Mars 6 or 7 months using artificial gravity. But those plans are really subject to revision over several administrations before we freeze the design. The big problem is that we can't test most artificial gravity effects on the ground. They're all related to spin. And the problem is that rotating room tests, the axis of rotation is the felt gravity level. And if you turn around, the same artifacts that you heard while facing this way recur when you face 90 or 180 degrees away. If you're in true artificial gravity where the spin axis is this way and you're around like this with your feet on the ground away from the axis, every time you turn around, the felt direction of spin reverses. And that can cause lots of problems. It also causes problems with coordination. And the 3 pictures down below show somebody who's in a room that's spinning at 10 RPM, and he's asked to swing his arms straight up. And because he's not adapted, he swings them to one side. But after doing it for a while, he can swing them straight even without trying. But then when they slowly stop the room and ask him to do it again, he swings his arms in the other way. And he would swing them even further if the spin were 10 RPM in the other direction, okay? We really don't know how big a deal this is. We know that in rotating rooms, people can accommodate within hours, sometimes a day, but we really don't know if when you turn around and the effect reverses, can you ever fully adapt to that? And, may you start throwing up days after when you do something surprising? We don't know. However, we can test this in low Earth orbit. And one thing that we can do, test on the ground. And that is when you're in artificial gravity and you walk with the direction of the spin, what matters for the centrifugal force is not the spin rate of the facility, but the spin rate of you in a spinning facility walking faster. And so that increases your weight. But then if you turn around and walk in the other direction, you lose weight. There is an indication that in most elevators, when they start up and slow down, it's typically about 0.05 G. And if people are stepping at that point, they often stumble a little. So 0.05 G plus or minus may be kind of a threshold, but we really don't know under more realistic conditions, but there is a test you can do on the ground, okay? Now let me skip this one. Okay. Test responses to artificial gravity weight change while walking. There's a facility called the Vertical Motion Simulator at NASA Ames that is for testing simulated aircraft with the actual seat of the pants effects up to 60-foot or 18-meter stroke, plus smaller strokes in the other 2 directions, plus rotations, et cetera. It's a big facility and has 4 or 5 interchangeable cabs. And one of them has a unobstructed floor of 3.7 by 1.8 meters. You can imagine, if you look at the bottom left, having 2 people walking in ellipses and having the facility go up and down to simulate the effect of weight change associated with walking in one direction and the other. And the question of how much of a big deal this is, we can test it on the ground. It's not a rotating room test, but it does test for the effects of weight change, okay? And I think that's valuable. It could be, by the time you're done, probably tens of thousands of dollars, maybe even 100,000, because you can probably want to do this with a lot of people. But this facility is available, as I understand it. Once the shuttle retired, they've not been using it a lot because pilots, before they flew on the shuttle, they always came out here to fly simulated landing approaches inside that. We're not doing that and haven't been doing that for 13 years now. I know it's used a little bit, but not much. So that's what you can do on the ground. This was Gemini 11. 30 meters of essentially seatbelt tape. Now, that rotation is really not the rotation of the full facility, but the rotation of the end mass oscillating about the slowly rotating thing. But this is the only test where we've had people in artificial gravity. And unfortunately, it was 0.0002 to 0.0004 G. The crew didn't even feel it, okay? But it was boring enough that they had lunch during the test, which was about 3 hours. Well, I'd like to suggest that this be done. Let me move this out of the way. On crew Dragon missions. And it can be missions, it's something that can be done in hours to a day or two, depending on how long you want to test. But it can be done as part of a mission. And it has to be done right at the beginning before you kick out the spent stage, the Falcon second stage. So there's a simple test that you don't deploy them, you just spin, and the weight of the stage, the mass of the stage shifts the CG so that you have about 4 meters or so of radius for the spin rotation. And I don't know how good that's going to be, but it's better than doing nothing, and it will get them thinking about the more challenging test where when you deploy the stage, you have it kept by a roughly 150-meter tether, and then after it deploys, you use the transverse thrusters on the Dragon to spin things up. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I have a paper that's in the Space Review a month ago. If you go to the Space Review and search for Carroll, there are 3 papers, and one of them is the one on how to test artificial gravity. The next step beyond that, the trick is you want to know what spin rates are acceptable before you design anything expensive, okay? And the worst case of designing something expensive is a donut because everything about it is designed for one diameter. And, you know, the difficulty of launching sausage-shaped stages that are curved, that's a problem. You're going to have to really build that facility up. But if you build something up by having 3 large modules, each launched by Starship, and the shape with the taper in it is based on the user guide version 1.0, which is still the only one available, but as I understand it, potential customers for Starship have been given other designs that are payload envelopes that are smaller than this. But at any rate, you could put 3 of these together and dock 2 crew vehicles, and then have 2 and 1 separate with a tube between them. And this tube is referred to as an air beam. It's actually used as the structure in military field hospitals. It's the thing that holds the membrane in place. And these things are very light, very strong, and when they are breached, there's no tearing or anything like that. Uses Vectran and rubberized material, and you can stow it very compactly and then unroll it to get, whatever length you want. Okay, and I have to move this. Yeah. And for spinning at 1.5 RPM, you use this length, 205 meters, and you spin up with thrusters on the smaller end. And because it's not quite a 2-to-1, you want a 7-to-3 ratio or 2.3-to-1. So what you want to do is actually move a small amount of mass from the moon end, from the Mars end to the moon end to get the 7-to-3 ratio. And then you can live in this for 6 months or a year if you have enough supplies. And supposedly the Starship is going to be more envelope limited than mass limited, especially the versions 2 and 3. So I think that you can do this in low Earth orbit as soon as you decide what length and spin rate you should have, okay? And that's the reason for doing these tests, is to figure out how long this would be, okay? Then the next step is build a resort, okay? And you need to kind of really think through not just sending 4 people at a time, but sending much larger number of people. And you're going to have a staff. When you go on a cruise ship, people usually go 3 to 30 days. But the staff all sign 8-10-month. There's a standard contract. The staff works 10 months, 77 hours a week in a split cycle, and they're working. They're making a lot of money compared to where they would be working at home. And here, the staff can be the guinea pigs for finding out the long-term effect of sustained Moon and Mars gravity. And if you're going to have tourists there, you can also have some medics, et cetera. They can be testing the health of the staff. So the whole point of this is to justify a large number of staff over a long time to understand the full implications of partial gravity with most people, not just half a dozen buff astronauts, but average people, okay? The tourists will only stay a couple days to a couple weeks, but the staff will be the subjects, the test subjects. And I think it's going to take quite a while because it's taken 60 years of people in microgravity to get many, but not all, of the health problems at least ameliorated. In partial gravity, where it's closer to 0G than 1, we're probably going to still need countermeasures. And it's not going to work right the first time any more than it has right now. in microgravity. So the argument here, and it's a big step compared to this, okay? But by the time, keep in mind when you're doing this, depending on the length of this facility, you will be able to see from the ground a structure, a short line that's slowly turning as it goes by. This will be a very bright, unique object. And I hope that that will help increase the demand for a tourism facility that helps subsidize the health tests needed to find out where we can live beyond Earth. So I've got some theses about the evolution of orbital tourism. Just a second. Cruise ships, staff and food dominate the costs. Okay. I think that'll happen here. There will be an additional cost that's substantial. Getting to the facility is going to cost a lot more. You need an astronaut ride ticket to get there. But when you have a substantial market for a resort, you're going to have more people flying. You're going to have more people in each vehicle. And if you do it quickly, if you're only there for a few hours, you can design the capsule vehicle insides as more like a bus than a motorhome. And so if you don't need to use the bathroom, you just wear a diaper while you're up there on the way up. And you don't need to use the bathroom. You don't need to sleep. You don't need to exercise. If you're just there for a couple hours, you can crowd a lot more people in the same vehicle and reduce the cost. So resorts will recycle air and water, just like the space station does. Settlements will try to recycle everything they can, okay? And again, the question of where the orbital tourism will occur, the price to get people and to get the facility launched is you can handle 10 times the mass going to LEO versus the moon for the same dollars. LEO resorts and perhaps even settlements are natural first steps before going to the moon and Mars, okay? I'm not going to go into great detail on this equatorial LEO. The whole presentation is, I presume, will be available. There are a bunch of backup slides, et cetera, that I won't be going through. But some of these slides I don't have time to go into, but equatorial low Earth orbit is a very interesting place. The one thing you don't get is the ability to see most of the world's area, especially your hometown. So why do settlements in LEO, not just test facilities and then resorts, why do settlements in LEO? Well, it costs much less to build everything that you need. And you can either say, well, if you go to the moon, you use lunar material. That's like country rock. There are huge industries needed to turn country rock into aerospace alloys and composites and things like that. You're not going to start that in the first settlement. The settlement ought to be in low Earth orbit with whatever supplies are needed and gradually try to recycle as much as you can. And one of the surprises is it's a lot harder to make a second stage reusable than a first stage. It may be that second stages are more useful in orbit, You can either use them as structures or you can cannibalize them, cut them into pieces and make micrometeoroid shielding or whatever. But spent stages and refuse are more useful than local ores on the moon or Mars for most purposes. You know, if you can get water from the moon or Mars, that's great. But you need a lot more things other than water. And your stages and your refuse are the best place to get that. Al Globus, retired engineer connected with NASA Ames, proposed that the first settlements be in equatorial low Earth orbit. And I think there are lots of arguments for that. And one of the unobvious ones is that equatorial low Earth orbit has far lower radiation doses than any other Earth orbit or anywhere else in the solar system on the surface. If you dig down 5 meters or more on the moon or Mars, you can get the kind of shielding you get by the Earth's magnetic field if you're in equatorial orbit. So not requiring meters of shielding around almost all of your facility is a substantial advantage, as is the fact that things cost much less to LEO than anywhere else. And I think they'll be even cheaper to equatorial LEO because you can launch on any pass and you can re-enter on any pass. If you're in an inclined orbit, you only can launch or re-enter when the launch state or landing site moves through the orbit plane. And that happens only twice a month, twice a day. And if you're not in the right place in the orbit, you can't deorbit and get home quickly. You have to deorbit, you have to leave the facility and coast for hours at a lower altitude. And then, but if you're in equatorial orbit, you can get up there immediately within 2 hours, and you can come home immediately within 2 hours. That's going to be the place for rapid, frequent service. And that's the sort of thing that reduces prices. Oops. So this is, I think, the strongest harangue that I'm going to have, okay? ISRU is a standard term, in situ resource utilization. It means using local materials. But when I have read that, it is always the celestial material that you've landed on, okay? Or the stuff below the surface that's icy. It doesn't usually include your own refuse, but that refuse has exactly the elements that you need to maintain a facility. There's no other local ore that's going to have anywhere near that useful a mix. So the slogan that I'm starting to recommend is mine are midden, and you can even make it into an acronym, MOM. Okay. Midden is a term that's used in archaeological digs for piles of oyster shells and broken pottery and dried excrement. Okay. We need to reuse as much of that stuff as possible because it's going to reduce the amount of supplies you have to deliver from Earth. For LEO, that's a problem. For anywhere beyond LEO, it's, again, 10 times as expensive. So I don't know how easily people are going to respond to the idea that the biggest resource, the most useful resource, is your own refuse. If that collection of elements were found as at a site on the moon, you would regard that as a very useful resource. Now, one of the problems in the space station is they had nowhere to put that stuff. And so they had a lot of vehicles that were intending to be burned up on reentry, and they'd fill them with all the trash. In the 25 years that the space station's been operational, the empty mass of those vehicles has exceeded the mass of the space station. You could build another space station out of them, okay? And the mass of the trash that they've gotten rid of has also been comparable to the 420-ton space station. So we have to start reusing not just the local resources, but the ones we bring with us, okay? And realistically, I think the time when a settlement that is born and grows up in low Earth orbit, the time when it will be ready to go to high orbit or L5 or solar space is when refuse recycling utilization has become like 90 to 99% of what you need. As long as you need lots of supplies from Earth, you're going to be paying for that cost, but you can afford it in LEO. If you go way beyond that, you're going to want to learn how to reuse your refuse. Okay. So end of harangue. The argument, my basic argument of multiplanetary versus interplanetary is probably unpopular in many areas, but I think that the focus on reusing refuse is going to be even more unpopular, but it's necessary. So here's a strategy for developing settlement technologies. I already showed 4 steps that were focused on evaluating health. Now the question is, what technologies do you really need? Well, the strategy is start on the ground because it's a lot cheaper. Test and refine what we can on the ground. And recycling is actually a small part of a larger picture that's referred to as a circular economy. And one of the things we need to do better on that is redesign products for longer use, easy repair, effective recycling, and minimal packaging, okay? Packaging is an insane thing on the ground, okay? We also have to take the automated stuff that's developed by UC Davis ag departments and others to automate agriculture on the ground. We need to adapt that to work on things in partial gravity in space with higher reliability, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that are best done on the ground because it's so much cheaper, okay? And by the way, anything you learn from that may also fit into the terrestrial improvements that we need, both for agriculture and for circular economy. Then test what you can, what we can in spinning space stations in LEO at much higher cost. You test crew response to various spin rates. That was the thing that we talked about earlier. Then crew health and countermeasures. Do that in LEO. Find and improve crops. Once you start to say that you're being a settlement or a resort that has a green flavor to it, you're going to have to grow things. And the importance of gravity is perhaps best indicated for crops by the Green Revolution, which started out as ways to grow rice and wheat with shorter stalks so they could have more grain without falling over. Well, you can be able to do that when you turn the gravity down to 0.38 or 0.16 G, and it may actually cause a problem where it just things go out of control. So you're going to have to find the best crops and improve the cultivars that grow in that situation. And you're also going to find bugs that aren't a problem in that are just a minor problem that may become the big problem in reduced gravity. They may grow much larger. So there's a lot of work, and that's best done in partial gravity in Leo rather than when you're far from home, much further from home. And then the fourth part of it is identify and develop the tourist market for 0G plus Moon and Mars G. My strong suspicion is that people on a spinning facility will want to spend time in 0G, but will end up spending much more time in Moon and Mars G because it's intuitive and they don't like to be novices that don't know how to do what they're doing. Okay. 0G takes a couple days to adapt. But actually, Moon and Mars gravity, particularly moon gravity, may help you adapt to 0G, but I don't know. Nobody knows. We can test that with some of these spinning facility tests in low Earth orbit with Crew Dragon or any other vehicle. So then test on the Moon and Mars what's left. And really, you don't need as much. Adapt to local conditions, temperature, pressure, lighting, materials, and learn how to mine and refine local materials. You can do a lot of this before you ever leave low Earth orbit, and that's how we're going to learn how to live off Earth, by living barely off Earth. So let's see, what time is it now? I don't know where I am. Okay, we're near the end of the hour. I didn't know exactly how this was going to run, but I've got 4 questions that I want you to think about. Do you want to test sustained low gravity health first in Leo or the Moon or Mars? That's a expensive question that marching armies, it's kind of like steering a marching army is like steering a aircraft carrier. You can't do it in a hurry. Well, this is a key decision that needs to be argued and taken seriously. And then the larger picture that leads to is, should we be thinking about and exploring multiplanetary or interplanetary or both futures? And then a practical question for each person. If you're going to stay in a resort, if it had access, just taking elevator to Moon and Mars gravity, not just 0G, how much longer do you think you'd want to stay there? And how much extra would you pay per day for that opportunity? And the answers to that, not for each individual, but for the people that want to spend money on this sort of thing, will determine whether spinning facilities, resorts are real. Okay. So I've gone through what I wanted to, and I hope there's enough questions.
Ja, so, I'm back. Thank you very much, Joe, for your lecture. And you give it, even if you were so sick and tossing all the time, coughing all the time. So I admire this. I also would
Thank
like to
you.
welcome Bernard Foying. He's our president. Hello, Bernard.
Hello, thank you. Yes,
Oh,
I could attend part of the lecture, but we had a special celebration today, a New Year. So as you know, we are celebrating Chinese Lunar New Year. So that's why I'm still dressed up for the event. And
Wait a moment. Joe, could you please
excuse me.
stop sharing the screen so we
Yeah.
can be seen all on the
Yeah.
screen?
Oh, we can, oh, I can
Yeah, yeah, but
unshare.
stop
Yeah,
sharing the screen. If not, we cannot see the
let's
speakers.
see.
Yeah.
Stop sharing. You have to go down. Where you remember? Downer. Where it appears
Up chair.
stop share. Where it appears stop share. You have to go more down. Yeah,
Ah,
yeah. So,
okay,
thank
good.
you so much. So,
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't see the red button that you were talking about, but
Mhm.
somehow it got out.
Okay. Yeah, thank
so
you.
Bernard,
Yes, okay. So indeed, so thanks for the lecture. I'm just
Bernard, what a beautiful jacket you are
yes,
wearing.
this is a Space Renaissance New
Fantastic.
Year. Yes, this is a Chinese New Lunar Year. We just had an event today, and we had also a beautiful concert from some of the winner of the Princess Christina. This is a national competition here in the Netherlands. So beautiful music. It's a good way to start the new year and give us a lot of energy, momentum to go to space. And so I could follow. I like your last diagram where you give the gravity of different bodies, so Earth-like, and indeed, you know, the moon is special gravity 1.6. It has more gravity than some of the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, huh? Because they are
Yeah,
mostly
yeah,
made
the
of,
four Galilean
yeah,
moons and also Titan
yes.
are all close to moon gravity.
Yeah, but below, even though the moon is smaller, because these bodies are mostly made of ice, huh?
Yeah.
And the density of the moon is high. So, yes, I had one question actually, because actually we studied a concept with some team of the International Space University of a spinning orbital facility where you could train for different level of gravity. I know. So they had a ring which had Earth gravity, but if you go in the center of the ring, you can be 0G. And if you are 1/3 of the way to the outer part or 1/6, you can get Mars gravity and Moon gravity. So clearly in a rotating structure where you want to simulate, let's say for short-term tourists that want to keep their comfort, they don't want to be all the whole time in a different gravity for ONG, you could still have this compatible with getting a possibility to go closer to the center of rotation where you could simulate Mars G or Moon G. So that's one way where we can train to different gravity. Another one before, you can do it with a parabolic flight, of course. In parabolic flight campaign, you can simulate 0G, you can simulate
30,
Moon.
40 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, you can simulate 23 seconds 0G, but also you can simulate moon gravity. You can walk on the moon, walk on
Yeah.
Mars.
Now, one of the problems with getting partial gravity in one of these flights, if you're in free fall,
Yeah,
even if the plane's bouncing up and down because of turbulence,
yeah,
if you're floating inside, you don't feel that.
yeah,
But
yes,
if you're in partial gravity, you feel that. And so it's hard. It's kind of like when you're walking in a plane and there's turbulence,
yeah,
you're at 1G on the average, but plus or minus 0.1, you end up needing your hands to help guide you and all
yeah,
this.
indeed. But on the other hand, if you walk on the moon, the surface of the moon is not that, even. So yes, so that's also. But yes, but you have a way to experience the walking on the moon, even if the gravity is, even if it's not completely stable. So I think we have to organize the Space Renaissance flight on a parabolic flight first for some of our colleagues. We have some collaborators that are running some parabolic planes and already trained to walk on the moon and Mars before we go there. Yeah. But yes, we are aware of some concept of a orbital facility where you can simulate also 1G and Mars and Moon,
Yeah.
0G. And
one of the interesting things is if you have a facility that has moon gravity and Mars gravity, if you spin it 60% faster, it gives you Earth gravity and Mars gravity because the ratio is just about the same.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then, okay, we have also to look at also the Coriolis force, that has an effect.
Yeah. So, for example, if you're going to be building more modules later, and the structure, the air beam is sized for a small module, a small mass, Mars and Earth gravity, and then when you add more modules, you slow it down and you get Moon and Mars gravity, and you're fairly efficient in your stages. You're not underspending or overspending at each point to be able to do both.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how much interest is there where are you in Europe?
Yes, I'm in the Netherlands. In France,
Aztec?
in Austria, in Italy,
Okay, all over the place.
Italy, so,
the US.
Yeah. All over the world.
And also we have a moon base in Hawaii. Yes. And
okay.
Yeah. So that's where we train to become citizens.
Heading
into space.
On Mauna Kea or?
So our base in Mauna Loa.
Mauna Loa.
Base that
where you have to think about volcanoes every now and then.
Yes. Also, the base is, but we have also a base in Poland, and we have a mobile moon base that is run jointly by Space Renaissance and by Linux that goes from place to place.
What altitude is that facility?
In Mauna Loa, it's halfway to the summit.
Oh, 14,000?
So let's say it's like 2,500 meters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but on the way to Mauna Loa Observatory, there is a meteor observatory and a solar observatory.
I got interested in the idea of a Mars simulation base on Mauna Kea, just outside the observatory zone, which is 3,300 meters or so. And the idea was that the air pressure difference between sea level and there is about 4 psi, which is what spacesuits run at typically. So you could practice a spacesuit, and if you got into trouble where the pumping didn't work, you just let a valve go and then take the helmet off and breathe the normal air. But so you could experience the 4 psi at sea level air at that altitude much more safely than you could in space.
Yes, so we have done simulation, in Mauna Loa at ICES. The base is called International Moon Base Alliance, and we do some traverse, and so it's quite physical, and you realize the altitude. So I have to say, and but Mauna Loa eventually is more practical because in Mauna Kea it's a holy mountain, and the native are very.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So
you can build a new observatory if you tear down an old one.
Yes, yes. So they are protesting against the TMT and the 30-meter telescope, and while in Mauna Loa there are no.
Well, I was proposing this because I had traveled up to Mauna Kea at one time.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that it's better than Mauna Loa. It's just what I was exposed to.
Yeah, Mauna Kea, there are plenty of observatories. I've been there as an astronomer, so it's a great place for astronomy. Yeah. So we can leave Mauna Loa for the explorers and Mauna Kea for the astronomers. And we hope actually eventually to organize a space renaissance workshop in Hawaii, in Big Island, in a collaboration with the ACES group and with the International Moon-Based Alliance. So hopefully we'll have, some of our core members attending this workshop in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adriano, do you have some questions?
Yeah.
Yes, some many thoughts because your presentation was really very much interesting for us. We in our committees, or the Space Science Academy committees, we are working on simulated gravity, and we're also working on possible reuse of space debris. So I think we have at least two things we resonate with. Space debris, orbital debris, because space debris is a wider concept, of course.
Let me comment on that. I was interested in collecting orbital debris, but I realized that the stuff that leaves the space station is already in the same orbit. And for example, if you're going to be launching Starship tankers, they all have to go to the same place. So those structures, a second stage that doesn't have to land and re-enter is much cheaper and lighter. Can you use that structure by collecting a bunch of them in one place?
Yes, definitely. Also, the second stages that are mostly made by aluminum it could be used to make fuel, to propellant for rockets. That's and there are a lot in orbit, many tons of those things in orbit. So it's a resource. We are writing on that since years, and it was also one of the arguments in our last Congress, World Congress in 2021. So because the idea to reuse orbital debris is very important, because making a business of that will be the only way to solve the problem also. Because if we only face this problem as a moral problem, it will never be solved.
Yeah.
If we understand the business
incentive, yes.
Then
economic incentive.
And we are working on some concept of simulated gravity. One of our board members is Jerry Stone from UK. I think maybe you can know him because he's a very seasoned space activist too. And he is a student of the O'Neill work, and he developed a concept of what he called Island Zero. Island Zero. That would be a demonstrator, a small demonstrator of the Island One concept of O'Neill, and that could be realized in orbit, in Earth orbit, for instance. So it would be very interesting to have a discussion with between you and Jerry, and with Werner Grandel too.
Yes,
Werner Grandel is an engineer.
Werner Grandel. I don't know if he is in the audience, but it doesn't seem so.
Yeah, no, I think we have to organize also a Zoom call among us, because Werner has developed a concept for an industrial plant in a Lagrange point. And so it's only a concept, of course. It's not we cannot call it a project. However, it's very well conceived, and It has a internal hub with zero gravity, where zero gravity products can be produced, and the rotating part where the crew will live usually. And so these are some the studies that we are going ahead. And for instance, Werner will present this idea at COPUOS next week. We will be in Vienna at COPUOS next week for the scientific and technical subcommittee. So we will. Yeah, we also had another crazy idea in this last month, that is to relocate the big data farms in orbit and in Lagrange points, because this big data farm are one of the most important reason of the energy demand skyrocketing on the world with the electronic
But right now,
so if we move them outside, they will be fed directly by the sun. So it will be an epochal change for the energy demand on Earth. And so we are carrying ahead some of these ideas. Okay, we are not developing projects, because Space Renaissance is a philosophical association. So we think about concepts useful for the civilization, for the advance of civilization. And we think about space policy. So I was very interested to your strategy for settlement. That's another of our concerns, because our impression is that things are going ahead in a let me say, a random way. Some entrepreneurs take the initiative, and that is good. But there's nothing like a well-reflected strategy for expansion, saying, I don't know, steps, for instance, to produce fuel in space would be the next milestone, important milestone. A reusable vehicle is the most important step now. But just after that, producing fuel in space will downsize the cost of any space mission. And for sure, your work, I think, is well connected, is well integrated in this kind of strategy for civilian. We call it civilian space development, to expand.
Yes. But let Joe talk a bit. And I have a question in the chat. You want to react to the remarks from Adriano?
yes.
Yes. Yes, you can. Or shall I give you the question from the chat?
Okay. Let's see. Okay.
Okay. There's a question from Denis Afonso Rivero. You all know him. The chat, I have to read it because it's on YouTube. Has there been any thought about attachment points on possible spent upper stages that would be used on tests, similar to the one you showed about the old Gemini mission? And he gives one example. I don't know if I pronounce it right now. G002E3 is an object in space which is thought to be the SIVB, is it correct? Third stage of the Apollo 12 Saturn V rocket. It was discovered on September 3, 2002 by amateur astronomer Bill Jong.
We have a tendency to focus on the fact that there are bodies in space, and then there's a lot of nothing in between except for sunlight. But if you look at it a little bit differently, you realize that you are throwing away stages at different points. And there's times when you can use them. And so, for example, the S4B stage, that's in solar orbit, and the frequency that it comes back is low enough that we should focus on something else. To my mind, the real place to look for existing vehicles. Let me actually go back to the Gemini. Gemini, one of the crew members went out in an EVA and practiced doing things that they wanted to do during Apollo. And it was only in Gemini 12 that they actually got it right. They had the right tools, and Buzz Aldrin did lots of tests. But on Gemini 11, they did these tests, and then they attached one end of the tether to the other vehicle. So the tether was attached to the spent stage. They attached it to their own. See, the Gemini was a vehicle that launched separately from their capsule. And so they rendezvoused and docked with it, and then they went out and attached the tether, I don't know which end. And there was a docking bar that was associated with the docking of the two objects. They connected the free end of the tether with that. And then when they separated and spun up, at the end of the experiment, they released the docking bar. So you can do something like that, but in the test with Gemini, with Crew Dragon, you don't have to rendezvous, and you don't need an EVA because the two vehicles are already attached and they can be attached before launch. My paper in the Space Review a month ago on how to test artificial gravity describes ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question of objects, you can really rethink spent stages because they are resources. So, for example, if you're leaving to go from Earth orbit to Mars, you're 3 kilometers, 3.5, almost 4 kilometers a second. That's a stage on its own, okay? And when it's empty, it's only 10% of the weight. Well, gee, that can be a counterweight at the far end. Your own waste is a mass that can be used. And that's why I was arguing that we have to reuse our refuse.
Mm-hmm.
Space it has nearly infinite resources that are nearly infinitely spread out. That's the challenge.
Bernard, you want to say something?
Yeah, but still, yeah, the operation in space are very complex. So how do we build the technology and also a system that is economical in the midterm? So do you see some industrial actors? Because you mentioned space renaissance, we have concept, we have ideas. Maybe we need to partner with some industry or some that could implement some test solution. But do you see some companies that are really working to develop this capacity?
Elon Musk has been very successful with SpaceX. But he's really focused on Mars, and I think that's a mistake. I think that the first group of people that go settle Mars will end up with, have you ever heard the term a Donner Party? It was a group of people that were going across the United States,
Mm-hmm.
and they got stuck in the Sierras and had to build a cabin
Mm-hmm.
and spent the winter there. They ended up eating each other.
Mm-hmm.
They have no food. I think as expensive as it will be to get people to Mars, it'll be even more expensive to keep them supplied until they know what they're doing about food recycling. So I think
Yeah, but
it's,
food is an issue because food, for instance, we are doing experiment how to grow food on the moon and also on Mars, regolith, Mars simulants. It's one aspect. But I was thinking more of the, okay, like some of the orbital facilities and how to recycle them. So are there really companies that are working the problem at the moment?
I don't know,
Yeah.
but I do suspect that with the new administration and the close connection between Elon Musk and the president, the new president, if Elon's not interested, it will not happen. And even the people that are entrepreneurs, I mean, I've been really disappointed that Blue Origin hasn't been doing more things successfully.
Yeah, I mean, they have a rocket now. So
Yeah.
But clearly, Elon Musk is focusing on the transport, but there is a lot of work to do on habitat, and there is enough
logistic
room in the ecosystem to allow all industrial partners to do habitat and circular economy. This was my point.
Yeah. Jeff Bezos, who funds Blue Origin, his interest is not in the rocketry, but he knows that you have to have that. He's interested in settlement concepts.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk with him about the tests that we should be doing, the technology development we should be doing on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
How to recycle refuse, how to grow things more automated. You're familiar with Biosphere 2?
Yeah, of course.
We I think NASA should be criticized for not getting up to Biosphere 5 by now.
Yeah, but still they did something, and there are other initiatives as well, smaller dimension, but that can help very much to develop some of the technology, maybe not in a completely integrated way, but also in some of the key subsystems that deserve progress. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that Bezos had trouble with his reusable second stage design and started working on expendable stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not be surprised if he's designing the thing to be reused in orbit as structure.
Mm-hmm.
Because, most spacecraft are fairly compact and people are going to want a lot more room. They're going to be a lot more structures. Rocket tanks are a good candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not be surprised if he's actually working that problem through as a second stage as part of a settlement structure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's try to find possible partners for a space renaissance village in space, because we have some of the concept, but we need also some of the people to do the work with us. No, thanks very much for your talk.
Yes, I also thank you very much for your talk, and I wanted to add, Denis Alfonso Rivero is thanking for your feedback, and he guesses the mapping of debris can be used to create a catalog of useful things orbiting about in accessible orbits.
Mm-hmm.
This, I think it's true, and I thank you very much, Joe, for being here with us, because I saw that you had a cough and you were very sick, and even though you did your talk and you stayed there.
Yeah, I don't know if you're able to splice out those coughing sections.
No, it's it was live, so everyone
We
has
are
seen it
all-
already.
We are
Yeah.
all like that. We are all like you. I also have a Coke
Yes,
from,
and
Yeah.
from
I
more
was
than 1
coughing.
month.
I was
Yeah.
coughing two
Go
once,
ahead.
and
What can
but
you
I
do?
would like to thank you very much. I thank to the audience for being with us all this time. Thank you to Bernard for coming and Adriano for organizing everything. And I also would like to remind that we are a non-profit organization, so if you can support us, if you want to join us, yeah, come to join SRI and help us. And I would like to mention that our next webinar will be, my computer is very, very slow, on the 3rd of February. We have Jason Arnold talking about a modern space elevator. This would be nice too, to enter in an elevator and be there. And yes, thank you so much, everyone. And I wish you all a nice week and a nice evening. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Ad Astra.
Yeah.
Ad Astra.
Best wishes for 2025 Chinese Lunar New Year.